Thank you for attending the Natural Stone Institute webinar, Efficiency, the Key to Growth for Fabricators. This session will be recorded and added to the online portion of the online university at the Natural Stone Institute. Before we get started, let's review a few ground rules. While we would like a very interactive discussion, everybody is currently on mute, or we are currently muting people. If you have a question, please raise your hand or write us a note, and we'll open up the question right away so you can ask your question. After the session, you will receive an email survey. This program is relatively new, so we want to learn as much information as possible about your experience. Please fill out the survey and send it back to us. We are currently planning topics for later discussions for later this year. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Ed Young. He's a consultant with a range of businesses from one-person startups to international Fortune 100 corporations. Ed understands that each business needs an appropriate structure for its unique situation. Experienced in conducting turnarounds, growing businesses, and consulting with owners and managers at all levels, Ed is capable of determining the needs of your business and implementing a plan to increase your profitability. However, those skills don't just come from a career in consulting. They come from a rich lifetime of experience which is grounded in his own manufacturing career. I would like to introduce Ed Young from We Reduce Chaos. Ed, thank you for coming in today.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate you having me, and glad to offer a repeat of this webinar. Hopefully all of you are having a really good week this week. I hope things are going well for you. Hope business is continuing to grow and your orders are continuing to get up and you're starting to hopefully beyond the starting phase of digging out from the challenges of the recession. If you're like everybody else around here, you're finding out that the tide rises for everyone. As your business is picking up, it's getting to be more and more of a challenge to hire good people. That's why we're here today talking. One thing that, and of course, the impact of that is your lead times are stretching out. You've got customers who are unhappy because they can't get their product as quickly as they'd like. Something to keep in mind, I do a lot of work with other types of businesses other than just fabricators as well. And this is happening everywhere. I was talking with somebody in the stone industry a few months ago. We were doing some work with them, and they thought they were the only ones out there. They thought we were doing a terrible job of hiring because we hired 10 and we're lucky to keep one or two good ones. And I said, well, welcome to the party. That's what everybody's dealing with these days. So the challenges that you've got are not unique to you. They're not unique to this business. Good news is there are some good ways to address that, and we'll talk about those for the next few minutes. So hopefully that pretty well sums up where you are today. Now there's some options for dealing with this. You can always pay more for the people you need. That's not your first choice, but that's the first option everybody else wants to tell you. They always want to say, pay me more money and I'll come over and work for you. You can steal from other folks doing that, but as I'm sure you know, if you can entice somebody away from a competitor to come work for you, it's just a matter of time before somebody else comes up with a little bit better offer, and then that person moves somewhere else. So that's not always a good solution either. You can find new sources of labor. There's some good places to go out there and look. I've had in the fabrication business, had folks go into auto detail shops and hire out some of their polishers that are making less money. They're used to managing the equipment and have a good eye for detail, and sometimes that works well. Of course, one of the offers that sometimes a lot of these polishers are working in open air buildings or even working outside. Even in spite of that, in the winter, sometimes that business is really slow anyway. So good, consistent work is always a good draw. There's some government programs out there. Because of the tightening labor market around the country, not just where I am, but in other places I've been, I'm finding out that there are lots of community colleges and technical colleges that have really good programs for training people to get them ready to go work in manufacturing. And let's face it, you're in the manufacturing business. A lot of times those programs will partner with other types of programs that are working with nonviolent ex-offenders or first offenders. Somebody who hasn't paid their child support, they ended up in jail. They're not somebody who's going to go out and take a gun and rob a liquor store, but there are people that They made a mistake, they're struggling, give them a good job, and they'll be in good shape. And that brush with the law is enough to get their attention, and now they're going to make a good employee. And there's some programs out there that take those folks, teach them soft skills, teach them some hard skills, and get them ready to be good productive folks in manufacturing plants. And then don't forget about us old farts. Yeah, this business can be tough because a lot of this product is really heavy, a lot of physical demands. But if you get some older employees who have a really good work ethic and who want a job and are willing to work for it, maybe it's worth investing in a little bit of mechanical devices to help with some of that physical lifting. So don't count those folks out either. So there's some options out there, and in a lot of these government programs too, by the way, there are incentives that sometimes will go with those, where you get a credit on your payroll taxes to help offset some of the training costs or that kind of thing, or a incentive to encourage you to hire those folks. So those are always worth looking into and researching in your area. And I've found that not just in my area, but also in other areas of the country I've been in. So those things are things to think about. Hopefully you're already doing some of that. If you're not, I'd strongly encourage you to look into those. But what we're going to talk about today is taking what you've got and taking not so much what you've got that counts, but using what you've got that counts, and finding a way to use the folks that you already have more effectively to help service your customers. To do that, we want to talk about define some terms, and one of the key terms we're going to talk about is value added. We'll talk about value added versus non-value added. Now, value added is always defined by the customer. No exceptions to that. The primary reason that value added is defined by the customer, if you think about why your business exists, if you're a business owner and you're running your business, the reason that business exists is to make money. We can make money by satisfying those customers. So the customer defines value-added activity. To get a little more specific, here's some other characteristics. A value-added activity is something a customer is willing to pay for. Something that if you were to ask the question, okay, is this the type of thing that you would expect us to be doing to build your product or to make your top? And they will answer yes or no. Obviously, it's got to be done correctly. Do-overs, mulligans, remakes, recuts, they don't count. And a good acid test is that a value-added activity is physically changing the product. It's anything that's involved in the physical transformation from the slab to the countertop. And we'll get a little more detail in this as we go through here. Non-value added, of course, doesn't add any value to the finished product. Another term for non-value added is waste. We're going to dig into waste and get into some examples of waste here in just a minute. There are also things when you run a business that need to be done that will be non-value added, but they're necessary. Processing payroll is a really good one. If you decide not to process payroll, folks will quit showing up for work, obviously. So it's got to be done. But at the end of the day, it's still non-value added. Your customers don't care what you pay your employees, how much you pay them, how long it takes you to cut a check. They care that you're making their top. So our goal with value added and non-value added is to preferably eliminate non-value added, but where it can't be eliminated, then reduce it as much as possible. And if we were to stop the webinar now and just talk about this, and you were to go off in a cloud of dust and take this concept that's on this slide and start to apply it to your business and look at all your labor that way, you'll get some benefit out of this. But we're going to get a little more in detail and give you some, hopefully give you some tools to work with to help you do that a little more effectively. I'm going to keep moving through these. If you do, as Aaron said, if you've got questions, shoot those across on the webinar. He'll stop me and we'll stop and talk about those. Non-value added, as we said, is waste. And there's an acronym to help us remember these categories that's really good. It's called Tim Woods. And we'll walk through each of these just real quickly and give you a couple of quick examples to give you a flavor for what we're talking about. The T stands for travel. And that's literally what it means, and that's moving parts from one place to another. If you're moving a cart full of stone or cut pieces from one part of your shop to another, that's travel. You're carrying them from one location to another outside your plant, that's travel. Inventory. Way to look at inventory. How many carts do you have in your shop right now? that have stone on them, but nobody is physically touching that stone. That's inventory. Another way to look at that is that's money that's standing still. That's not money that's moving through your plant, it's sitting still. Karen, sounds like I may have somebody we need to mute there. The next one's motion. Motion is different than travel. Motion has to do with typically a person reaching, stooping, climbing, a lot of excess physical motion, more than is required to get the job done. W is waiting. Waiting, as we look at people, is them sitting and waiting on things to come to them, or waiting on answers to questions, that sort of thing. You can also have machines that are waiting on work, and you can have product that's, if you think about your inventory. Aaron, can we mute that one?
I'm trying to find it. Sorry.
Sorry. I know if it's distracting me, it's distracting you guys too. If you think about the inventory that's sitting on carts, has nothing being done to it, that's product that is waiting. So there's several different examples of waiting waste: people waiting, machines waiting, and product that's waiting. Overproduction is the first O. That's when you're making more than you actually really need to have right now. If you think about it, any of that inventory waste that you've got in your shop right now was caused by overproduction. So overproduction is one of those things that tends to create a lot of other evils. When you make things too early, or you make more than you need, then it creates a lot of these other problems. Overprocessing, you may not have much of this. Sometimes I've seen this in a few fab plants. It could be that I think most of you have a market segment or two that the polish that you can get off of a CNC polishing wheel is perfectly sufficient for that market segment. Maybe it's apartment complexes or something like that. That's not necessarily high end. They're doing your lowest grade granite and your lowest price. But yeah, you may still take those and put them in your polishing department and have your hand polishers go give them a quick once over. If it really isn't needed, and it's not required by the customer, and the customer doesn't really want to pay you for that extra work because they don't need the results of that, then that would be overprocessing. The next one's defects. That's pretty self-explanatory. If you don't do it right the first time, then anything else that you do is totally not value added. And then the last one is skills. Skills is an important one. We're talking about labor and trying to make the most out of what we've already start to apply them, then the reality is you'll be making changes in your operation. If you go in and force those changes down the throat of folks, then from experience, that's not going to be really well received, and that's going to be tough, and it's not going to last. If you, on the other hand, get your folks involved in making these changes and figure out how can we start to execute some of the things we're going to talk about, then they get involved, they have ownership. And if you think about it, your employees have got a lot of other skills than what you pay them for. Sure, you got a person that's running a saw, but they kind of run their own business, they run a household. And some do better than others, but they got a mortgage in many cases. They got a note on a car, they're paying bills, they're raising a family. They've got lots of other skills. And so not taking advantage of those skills and not using them to help improve your business is a really big waste. Okay. So that's our Tim Woods acronym that talks about waste, and it gives a little more definition on non-value added. Let's look now at how we might apply this to something like a saw. Up in the upper right-hand corner, I've got our 3 key rules for value-added. Customers willing to pay for it, must be done correctly, and it must change the product physically in some manner. So I'm going to list out just a few typical tasks that a saw operator would do, and then I'm going to give you a minute to think about it and think about whether you think they're value-added or non-value-added, and then I'll show you the answers. The first is moving the slab cart to the saw, something pretty much all of us do one way or the other. Somebody may use a crane, others use a cart. Going and finding the paperwork for the next job. Hey, I finished up this one, boss. Where's my next one? Where's my paperwork? Setting up the CNC program, if it's a CNC saw, or if maybe this is a water jet, the same kind of thing. The actual cutting of the stone. Unloading the cut pieces to the cart after you're finished up. Then there's always those big island tops. It takes a village to move them sometimes, and so Bob goes and helps Joe and Tim and a few other guys move this top around on another machine somewhere. and then inspecting the top to make sure it's correct. So take a second, look at those items, those different tasks. Think about, is a customer willing to pay for it? Does the customer care how much of that you do? Is it being done correctly, and is it physically changing the product in some manner? And think about what you think might be value added and what you might think might be non-value added. So look down through those, and here's the evaluation. Obviously, moving the slab to the slab cart to the saw, finding paperwork, those types of things are non-value added. Setting the CNC program up, if it's a CNC machine, you got to do it, but it's not physically transforming the product. The only thing on that list that physically transforms that product is the time that the blade is in the stone. It's cutting that stone time. Everything else is non-value added. And one thing I get a lot of pushback on is that last one, which is inspection. You know, folks will say, "Hey, I gotta inspect this thing. The customer wants us to inspect all this." Well, I gotta ask you, does the customer really want to pay you to inspect it, or would they rather you design your processes so you made it right the first time? Kind of goes back to using your skills with your people, and not wasting those skills to figure out how to do this right the first time. Okay. As you look through this and you see this list of tasks, obviously there are lots of other things a saw operator might do. Think about all the other things that you're in your mind that your saw operator does during the day-to-day. And think about what % of time you think that saw operator might actually be doing value-added work. If you think about how you can start to tackle that, which is what we'll get into in a little bit, you know, what's it worth to fix that? What's that do for you? And we'll talk about impact here in a little bit. One thing to keep in mind is a lot of folks get hung up on cost, and this is not really so much about cost as it is about capacity. If you're having trouble finding good labor, then the amount of good labor you have limits how much value-added activity you can get through your plant. And if you think about things that way, the cost issue doesn't come into play, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. Here's an install example. I'll do this a little bit quicker. Driving to the job, unloading the truck, setting up tools, placing the finished top section on the cabinets, making seams, going to the truck, getting a tool or some caulk, installing the sink, getting the check from the customer, or getting a sign-off. Think about value-added versus non-value-added. Look at our guidelines in the upper right-hand corner. And these are the things that are value-added would be the actually placing the tops on the cabinets, making those seams, and the installing the sink is kind of a trick question because the only part that's value added is physically attaching the sink to the top. Going and getting the sink out of the truck, going and getting the caulk, going and get whatever devices you use to hold that sink in place, or tabs that you glue on or screw on or clips. You know, all that kind of stuff is non-value added unless you're physically screwing those clips into the top. So something that's critical you got to have is that check from the customer or that sign-off. It's essential, but it's non-value added. So again, a few more examples of things you can look at. If you can think about how to tackle some of those and how to reduce that non-value added, you can increase the amount of value added that's going on and get better utilization of the labor that you've already got. So let's talk about how we might actually accomplish some of this. One of the things is make the work visible. If you can take your schedule and find some way to make it your production schedule, your install schedule, make it visible in the shop. I've seen folks actually put up a huge board, take several 4x8 sheets of plywood and paint them and put Monday through Friday across the top, and template CAD, cut, CNC, polish, install down the left-hand side, and have a way to hang up all the different jobs or in those different statuses, different processes with different days, and have dates on those so that people know when they're due. And now you got a very visual board that helps people see what needs to be done. They don't have to go ask questions and hunt for things. That's just one example of making work visible. A big one people get tied up with a lot is paperwork, making sure it's complete, making sure all the information on it's very clear, easy to understand. You think about your shop, and you think about, okay, if I think about that as like a piece of PVC pipe, it's got a certain capacity to get value-added work through it. Well, You want to make sure that you're feeding the right stuff in there. You don't want to feed stuff in there that's wrong, for example, because you're wasting that value-added capacity. That means that your sales folks and your front office folks, you got to make sure that paperwork's right before it goes to the shop. So standardizing that, and don't just have a quick 5-minute meeting. Okay, here's a new form. Got any questions? Let me know. Go through and walk through it. Train folks on it. In fact, better yet, get them involved, get the shop involved in helping fix that paperwork and design it so that it works well for them, because they are the customer of the folks generating that paperwork, which is your sales folks and your office folks. Sometimes in cases it makes sense to get some helpers to do a lot of the non-value-added work. The way your shop's laid out, moving machines is expensive, it's difficult to do. You may have a lot of space limitations, and so you can't really cut down those travel distances between machines. It's not really a good way to do that. But if you got some expensive, hard to replace and experienced technical people who run CNC machinery and that sort of thing, know your product, know the materials, know the jobs real well. If you want to optimize how much time they spend doing value-added activities, then having somebody else take care of the non-value-added work can be a big help. Now, where you do that's important, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but don't discount that as an option. In fact, the first case study that if we have time to get to, and I've got links for those in the last slide, is a really good example of how we did that in a different industry. It's a really pure example of that. What's the impact if you do this? If we were to go in and free up skilled labor time, standardize our paperwork, make our production schedule visible, hire some lower wage helpers that want to help learn and grow. Maybe we take some of those low wage helpers and they want to start to learn the business. And so we set up maybe a little bit of a master apprentice type training structure. That's got a lot of other benefits, but we could put something like that together as well. Start to kind of grow your own, so to speak. And I've done that with some manufacturing folks, both in this industry and in other industries. And it's a great way to help folks feel appreciated. It's a great way to help them learn, and it's a great way to grow people that learn to do things the way you want them to do. If you think back, it wasn't that long ago. That was how every trade, every person learned a trade was through that master apprentice program. If you do that and you do it fairly well, it's not unusual to increase your shop capacity by 10%. You can go bigger than that, and we'll talk about some ways possibly to do that, but 10% is not unusual. And as a result of doing that, you're going to, your profits will go up. Even if you have to hire a few low-wage people, depending on the size of your shop, you're going to still, the increased capacity will pay for that several times over. So your profits will go up, your capacity will increase, and what that will do is reduce some of your backlog. It won't take all your backlog off. It depends on how much of an increase you actually get and how fast new orders are coming. Now we're talking about primarily labor here, and these things will help address the labor issue. It doesn't totally solve all of them, but these are ways that you can start making an impact in the next few weeks in your plan if you start to apply some of these techniques. That's a really good start. So let's look at application, where you might do this. Obviously, if you did this everywhere in your shop, you'd have some benefit, but where you get the most benefit is where you have your most critical jobs, where you've got your highest skilled employees that are hardest to replace. Those are pretty obvious places to start, but I would encourage you to take some time and look at where your bottleneck operation is. Where's the operation that causes your most problems? Jobs typically get hung up. If you can go in and apply this effectively at that operation, you'll have the biggest impact on the capacity of your shop to generate value-added activity. And that's a key thing to look at, because if, for example, your polishers, you're having a hard time getting polishers, they're not your most expensive people necessarily, but you're having a hard time getting them, and that's where your bottleneck is. If you go in and apply this to the CNC operator, you'll get a little bit of benefit, but it doesn't give you more capacity at polishing. So keep that in mind as you apply this. Everybody's busy. You don't have a lot of time. Trying to do this plant-wide is really difficult. So take a little bit of time and assess where your bottleneck currently is and start there, because you'll get the biggest impact and the biggest payback for that, okay? So that's a really important thing to look at. If you want to see what that, do a quick calculation, see what that looks like, on the website, there's just a quick little spreadsheet that you can pull up that's a value-added, non-value-added calculator. You can go in and I won't pull it up right now because we're running a little bit behind time. But you can go in and key in your value added time, put your tasks in, put your value added time, non-value added time, see what your percentages look like. Take that time for a typical job. It'll pull it out to look like a full day and tell you what percentage of 8 hours would be. And as you go in and try to attack non-value added, you obviously you want to eliminate it where you can, but trying to eliminate all your value added up front can be really, really difficult. It's a lot of change and it can take a while. I like to recommend folks, your aggressive approach would be to try to cut it in half. If you cut it about 20-25% in the right location, it can have a big impact. But try to eat this elephant in a bite at a time, and do this in stages. You do it all at one time, and you're going to run into some really big challenges that you're going to be tough to deal with. So what if we actually did this? What if we went in and applied the techniques we talked about, and talked about the product itself? And we've talked about labor. We've talked about machines a little bit, blade and stone time for a saw, for example. But what if we apply value added and non-value added to the product itself? Think about from the time the slab enters your shop until the time your finished top is installed. Think about what percent of the time is actual touch time, actual value-added work. Blade and stone, tool and stone, polishing wheel on stone, making seams at the install, those types of things. And think about what that might actually look like. Normal lead time for a kitchen is typically measured in weeks. Most of the shops I've been in, 6 to 8 weeks is not uncommon, and with especially coming up on summer and construction cranking back up here, it'd be easy to see months in some cases, in some places that I've been anyway. But if you look at that touch time, that value added time, it's typically measured in hours. So what's causing that? And it goes back to non-value added. It's all those Tim Woods things. It's typical that the ratio of value added time for the product versus the total time it's in the shop is typical to see 5 to 10%, and that's on the high side. In this industry, and in fact in many other industries, it's normal to see less than 1%. A white men's T-shirt, for example, just 4 to 5 minutes of actual touch time, but easy to have 4 to 6 weeks of lead time in the shop. That's very normal. So that's, again, we looked at labor, looked at machines a little bit. This is applying it to the product. This is another way to take the value added, non-value added, and start applying it to your business to get a lot of impact. And again, if you take just the labor portion we started with, and that's what you came to hear about, and you apply that well, do it in the right spot, getting a 10% bump in capacity can have a big impact, and it's not terribly difficult to do. If you want to have a whole lot more impact and start looking at the machinery and start looking at the product time the product spends in the plant, that sort of thing, then you really need a production management system that addresses all of those. It'll optimize your product flow, maximize your capacity utilization, and can have a huge impact on your business. It's easy to see a 25% increase in capacity, increase in throughput for your business. 40% is not unusual, and I've seen it as high as 50 in some cases. Every business is a little bit different, so you can't really predict necessarily. You'll find higher profit with those when you do that because you free up all that capacity. You may add a little bit of low-skill labor in there. You're typically not having to buy machines. It has to do with optimizing what you already have. And your profits, of course, go up considerably when you can increase capacity by 30% or so. Inventory will go down tremendously. Think about the cash that you've got tied up in inventory right now sitting on the shop floor. Think about the velocity of that cash that you don't have because that inventory is sitting there. It's easy to cut inventory in half and then some. Lead time, of course, from weeks to days. That's a big one. Think about, too, whether you can sell that or not. A lot of folks I work with in the countertop business, what we shoot for, what we end up helping set up is a template Monday, install Friday type lead time. Several variables that drive into that, but if you do it well, that's what you can expect out of this with these kind of impacts. And then, of course, when you've got short lead times and you've got low inventory, your cash flow is phenomenal. Your cash cycle gets really short because things are turning very, very quickly. Has a huge impact. And those of you who own and run your own business, I mean, I've owned my own business. I've made payroll out of my hip pocket on more Fridays than I want to remember, for sure. You understand the impact of cash flow. Those of you who don't own your own business, your owner can certainly tell you that really quick. And it makes the result of this is that it makes your shop a lot more manageable. It settles the chaos down. It gives you predictability and control. I like to say that if you've got really good predictability and control in a production facility, then by about the middle of the month, in fact, about this time of the month right now, with any kind of backlog, you'll have, and if you've got good consistent performance, you could sit down right now and pretty accurately predict your profit and loss statement for February. Rather than waiting until the middle of March to get the results from your accountant, trying to make the changes, you don't really know the full impact of those changes till you've been all the way through a full month of April. Then you look at it at the end of May and say, oh, I did well or I didn't do well. This gives you the ability to start to be forward-looking and be proactive if you get the right system in place. Those details of how to do that, of course, are beyond the scope of this webinar. Maybe we'll touch on that in a future session. But again, if you take what we've talked about here today and apply it just to labor, getting a 10% increase in capacity, if you do in the right spot, can really have a big impact, and it's not that tough to do. So something to keep in mind. We've got some case studies we can get into, but I think before we do that, I would like to open up to some questions and see if there's anything that we need to talk about specifically before we talk about case studies.
Okay, thank you, Ed. If somebody has, or anybody has any questions, you could write them in, and then I can ask them, or let me know, and I can unmute you, and then we'll answer the questions. Probably the first question that has popped up, what do you see as the main area for bottlenecks in a fabrication facility? I know you've done a couple of case studies in the past, and you said finding your area of bottleneck. Where's the typical bottleneck for a fabricator?
It's, to be honest, it varies in every fabrication plant I go into. There are not that many sequential steps in fabricating a top. But a lot of what we'll try to do, if we're putting in the entire production management system that I kind of alluded to there at the end, what we'll actually do is sit down and select where we want that bottleneck to be. Because if you think about it, you go in and make changes and you break the bottleneck and you relieve that, you increase that capacity, all of a sudden the bottleneck moves somewhere else. So then you got to do it again. And you can spend a lot of time chasing bottlenecks. Now, as you're doing that and doing it well, you're increasing capacity. But also, too, what's happening is you're shifting your focus all over the plant. And what I like to do is get folks to pick a focal point and say, okay, we're going to treat that like the bottleneck, and let's set everything else up to make that the case over whatever time it's going to take to get there. And a lot of times we'll set that bottleneck up at install, because that bottleneck or that constraint is a control point that we're going to leverage the business around. And if I want to leverage a business, if I own a business and want to leverage it, and I want to control it, I like to control it as close to the cash register as possible, as close to the customer as possible, because that sets the tone for the whole rest of the business to support that. To eventually drive it to install, but when I walk into shops, it can be all over the place. In fact, what happens in many cases is the bottleneck is wandering all over the shop, and sometimes it's tough to, unless I've got a specific labor issue or a specific machine issue, sometimes it's tough to pin it down.
Okay, that sounds great. Frederick actually just asked the question. I unmuted him, but he wanted to know if there were any quick action. What are the best quick action things that a facility can do to increase production?
Well, the first place is try to figure out if you've got a bottleneck, where it is. Do you have a job right now where you're, some one CNC operator, 2 or 3 polishers, that kind of thing. Example, you're short a CNC operator. If that's the job that you've got a vacancy right now, and that's the place where you're struggling to get that job filled, then that's going to be your current bottleneck more than likely. So going in and doing this type of activity at that one spot is going to be really key. What I would do is when you get off this call, walk out in your shop to that point, wherever it is, and stand there and watch that person that's doing that job or those people doing those jobs at that bottleneck operation and say, okay, is what they're doing value added or non-value added? And just look at your wristwatch and just keep a track. Okay, that was about 5 minutes of time. That was 10 minutes of time. Here's 30 minutes. That's all value added. And start looking at, okay, now why are they having to do it that way? What's making them have to walk over here and do this? What's making them having to go hunt for that over there? And then get them involved and say, hey, how can I help? How can we make your job a little easier so you have to walk all the time, so you don't have to go hunt for stuff, so you don't have to interpret information, that type of thing, and start having those conversations this afternoon.
Okay. Another question that came up right from the beginning, you talked about different resources, tax credits, places that you could go to find labor. If you were looking at the tax credits, do you have suggestions on where to find those or what programs might be available?
Community colleges and technical colleges are a good place to start. Your Chamber of Commerce folks, your local or regional economic development people, the folks who go in and recruit new industry. Usually your economic development or if you have a state Department of Commerce or Department of Industry, something like that, they'll typically will have a department that deals with existing industry, and those folks will have really good be able to point you in the right direction for where to go get those. Most of ours come through our technical colleges in my state, and that works out really well. But you can hit those other sources, and if you just start asking around, any place where business people gather, any place where especially manufacturers gather, and start asking those questions, they'll be able to point you in the right direction typically.
Okay. Another question that came in has to do with measuring the waste. You brought up that a 10% increase in production. Is there a way that you suggest on measuring waste and then the cost that would be to your company if you could fix it?
I'd encourage you not to focus on the cost of that. I'd encourage you to focus on capacity. If you've got a operation that runs 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, today, Thursday, it's scheduled to run 8 hours. What percent of those 8 hours was spent doing non-value added activity at that bottleneck operation? And what I would do is look at it in terms of capacity. It's not unusual to walk in and you take this first look at it and you realize, wait a minute, my constraint is here at the CNC machine operator, and doggone it, only 40% of his day is value added. Well, if you can cut a portion of that out so that all of a sudden that CNC operator now is doing 50% of his day is value added, you've just increased, and if that's your bottleneck, you've just increased your capacity by 10 divided by 40, that's 25%. So I wouldn't look at the cost of that so much. I'd look at the capacity, and when you look at the capacity and the impact on the bottom line as a result of being able to fill that capacity, my assumption that I'm operating off of is that you're like most other businesses I walk into, countertop fabricators and others, have a growing backlog and they need capacity, That's why labor is such a big issue. And so my assumption is when you free up that capacity, go from 40% value added to 50% value added at a bottleneck operation, that you can fill up that 10% additional capacity, or those 10 percentage points. Those 10 points divided by the basis of 40, that's a 25% increase in capacity. So that's 25% more sales dollars you can get through your plant in a day or in a week. And when you start looking at cost doesn't really matter a whole lot. Spending a little bit of money here or there, when you start looking, okay, that's that 25% increase over 8 hours. What's that worth per hour? Taking those sales dollars, it's pretty easy to do the math, and cost becomes less of an issue.
Okay. We'll do a couple more questions, maybe one or two.
I'm interested in it. I don't want the free.
Sorry. We'll do one or two more questions. If you have a question, definitely send it in. And I see A couple people have wrote in. Dennis, I'm going to unmute you if you want to ask the question that you just sent. Dennis, are you there? Okay. Dennis has a question. He has studied the countertop fabrication business, the process, and realized that they're having a hard time keeping up with the sheer volume of certain edges, which are creating the bottleneck. Our manpower is overwhelmed, and we have determined that we need to add a high-speed linear polisher that is polishing the face and using both the top and the bottom in one press. In our case, adding the equipment makes more sense than adding more people. Do you have anything to add to this? His question's more along the lines of the machinery. Are there machine situations that you see that could create a lot of efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can automate a process and anytime you can add machinery and you can afford to do that, you know, if you can't find polishers and if you can go buy polishing machines, they'll do the job for you. And you can't find polishing operators, then certainly those are benefits. But it's never a quick black and white decision. Again, my premise is let's take what you've got, use what you've got that counts, optimize that as much as possible, and then decide where to invest in machinery. It's easy to walk into a plant and say, oh, I got a bottleneck in polishing, let's go buy a bunch of polishing machines. And then, you know, well, whatever we have to clean up by hand is fine. We're not doing everything by hand. And that certainly can make a lot of sense if you've got the money, if you've got the market demand for it, if you've got the space for the machines. You know, one of the things that I think most fabricators are figuring out now, but back, you know, 10, 20 years ago, they didn't know quite as well. When you start buying machinery, if you don't have a game plan for maintaining it well and for keeping it updated and keeping it serviced, and you don't do that religiously, then that piece of machinery that was going to solve your problem ends up creating an even bigger problem down the road because it dies or the quality coming off of it's not as good or it gets really slow and you haven't maintained it. And as long as you're taking care of things like that, a machine certainly can be a good answer to a capacity problem or a bottleneck problem. I'm not trying to talk you out of that. I'm just trying to say, okay, let's take what you got and let's get the most out of that first. Because sometimes when you do that, you find a way to you find a way to shift that bottleneck to where you ultimately want it to be, which we talked earlier about maybe having it at install possibly. And you're able to make some changes in your shop, and you won't necessarily need to buy as big a machine or as an expensive machine. There have been cases where I've been able to help somebody make enough changes in their plant they didn't have to buy any machine. And every situation is different. You know, if you've got just absolutely explosive growth in your area, and you've got more work than you can get done in the next 3 years, and yeah, you're going to need a huge amount of capacity, and machinery is the only way to go. No question about it.
We'll do one or two more questions. If somebody has a question or comment they'd like to add, definitely write in. We will. One question that has popped up: what type of training programs have you seen to teach efficiency to your team or to your facility? You have brought up training as a good way to really push somebody through the process. Are there materials out there that you've seen that work really well in that training?
Well, Natural Stone Institute's got a lot of good training materials. You know, Use Your Industry Association, of course. That's the technical stuff. But in addition to that, you need some soft skills training. I'm not sure what the Stone Institute's got for that, but I certainly look at that. But again, local technical colleges and all can be a really big help with that. One of the advantages of looking around. Let me back up. So we got technical training, we got soft skills training, and then you've got the structure for the training. And I mentioned apprenticeships earlier. Some states are now starting to put together apprenticeship programs, and they're starting to offer incentives for companies like countertop fabricators setting up their own in-house on-the-job training, but structured apprenticeship type programs. And I would go look for those very heavily, because as you start to train folks with the technical skills and the soft skills, if you can get some payroll tax credits or other types of incentives for that to help offset some of those costs, because it's not going to be free for you, but it's a really good investment to make. And I think it's one of the best investments you can make to help reduce turnover and increase people's buy-in to your operation, is to spend that time and effort training them. And I think apprenticeship is a great structure. But I'd go look for those, and I'd also look for those soft skills, because you have all the technical skills in the world, but if you can't figure out how to solve problems together and how to communicate well, then it's kind of tough to get along and get things done. So I look for soft skills as well.
Okay. Ed, we received a phenomenal question. You spent a lot of time talking about the actual facility. Somebody brought up the paperwork. How do you fix the bottleneck on the paperwork that goes through, from estimating to sales to templating? Are there tips or things that you've seen that could cut down the bottlenecks that are created by the paperwork going through the process, in addition to that facility?
There's not a magic wand I can wave, but I can give you an approach that's been very effective in the past, and that's to start with the customer. What are the things that we need to make sure we've got totally documented so that the right configuration of countertop ends up in the right kitchen? And then go back and say, okay, what does the installer need to know in order to do that correctly? What does that polisher need to know in order to feed it to the installer? Work your way all the way back through the process. And what you end up with is getting everybody in your process, people who are doing the value-added work, or helping drive the structure of that paperwork up into the front office into sales, so that those folks know what they have to do now as part of their job in order to service their internal customers, so your internal customers who are doing the value-added work can delight your paying customers. And that's the approach that you really need to do. Keeping it simple, keeping it visual. I like eliminating as much handwriting as possible, because it's always too easy to misinterpret something somebody's written. But that type of approach, starting at the end and working your way back to the beginning, will help you understand a lot of things.
Well, we're approaching the end of the hour. Ed, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everybody with before we wrap up?
I would encourage everybody, folks go to conferences, you go to seminars, you go to classes, and the challenge is always, how do I do this? My challenge to you is, when you hang up the phone here in a few minutes, go out to an area that you think might be your bottleneck and stand there for 15, 20 minutes and just kind of watch what those folks are doing and figure out what portions are value added, what's non-value added. You'll begin very quickly to see some opportunities. And if you start to act on those opportunities, getting those folks involved, you're going to build morale, and you're going to start making some really positive changes in your operation.
Well, I want to thank Ed Young from We Reduce Chaos. This was a great webinar, a lot of great tips out of this discussion. For everybody who's here, we will send out updated audio and visual webinar of this so you can watch it. We will also send out some information regarding the webinar series and other resources that we have available. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to give me a call. I'm Aaron Danke with the Natural Stone Institute. So thank you.
Folks, thanks for your time. Hope you have a great rest of your day.